Change is hard, not because you're doing it wrong, but because it asks something of you. Welcome to Change is Hard, a podcast from the Leadership Lab. I'm Audrey Blair, and this is a space for leaders who are learning how to sit with uncertainty, make decisions without rushing, and grow without losing themselves in the process. We'll talk about the moments that stretch you, the conversations you keep avoiding, and the quiet shifts that change everything. No noise, no pressure, just honest conversations about becoming the kind of leader and human you actually want to be. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome in, welcome back. Thank you for being here. I hope that you are doing well. I'm doing good. It was a little chilly today. I think can't decide if it's supposed to be spring or not, but I know that's happening in a lot of places, so I won't complain. Um, I recently saw my husband and I went to go see the new movie Project Hail Mary with Ryan Gosling, and it was really good. I read the book a few years ago, so I was very curious to see how they were going to pack all of that into a movie and how they were going to handle. I know I'm not giving anything away. There's clearly an alien in the trailers, and so what they were going to do there and how they projected that. There are a few things I think that they could have explained just a little bit more to close that gap for people who didn't read the book. But all in all, I thought it was fascinating. That was really good. And it's an Amazon Prime movie, so I would imagine it's going to come out and streaming really, really soon. I was trying to think if there was a way to connect anything in the movie with what I'm going to talk about today. There's a little theme. And what I want to talk about today is when you are trying to do your job, and you are actually doing a good job, but there are certain aspects to it that you literally cannot do because somebody is in the way, like just in the way. And in the movie, the main character is pretty defiant about something pretty major, so they had to figure out a way to work around it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you work around it, and specifically, I want to talk about when it is your boss. There can be lots of things. It could be systems, structure, hierarchy. It could be lots of things that could lend to that. But I do want to talk about specifically when you feel like, gosh, my boss is actually the one that's getting in the way from me getting my work done, is the one that's getting in the way with me being able to move forward. So let's talk about some of the layers and some of the things that occur. And it came up a couple of times in some sessions with a couple of clients. One whose boss is literally in the way. At least that's the idea that presented. And then a couple of times where I was working with someone who was a boss, and I thought that's probably something you might want to double check on and make sure that your people are actually doing well if you're not spending the time and checking in with them as often as you can. So, but I do know that there is a very specific kind of frustration that occurs when you know exactly what needs to be done, but you literally cannot do it. And maybe you're waiting for them to get back to you. You're waiting for them to open up a door. You're waiting for them to make a connection. You're waiting for them to share some ideas or some thoughts or give you the overall objectives. That can be really hard because it has nothing to do with your competence. It has nothing to do with you being unclear. It's just, again, the system, the structure, or in this case, again, your boss getting in the way. So at the end of the day, it's your ability to execute is dependent upon someone else who isn't showing up for you. And that is the idea. I was working with a client and she said something like, I need to have a strategic conversation. And my boss is the person I want to have the strategic conversation with, but they're just not showing up. They're not talking to me. They're busy doing other things. And I can't even tell what's going on and where we're supposed to be and where we're heading. And it's very, very frustrating. Now, there can be lots of reasons for this. It could be a new boss, new person, new to the role or new to the company. It could be that they are being pulled in a lot of different directions. It could be that they don't understand what their role is as a boss. So not necessarily a bad person, but just not a great boss. It could also be that they don't know how to create some of these boundaries, and or it could be that they just think you're doing a great job and you don't need them. And that was one of the ones that I talked to one of my clients about, that he had mentioned hey, I've got someone that I'm spending a ton of time because they keep making all these mistakes, and my heavy hitters, I'm just letting them go. And I said, that's a good thing, but don't let them go too long without checking in just to make sure that they're getting what they need from you, because you can help to create some of those connections and spend just a fraction of the time that you're spending over there with the person who's not doing well, and they will take that and you'll get a huge return on your investment because they're going to take it and run with it. So don't leave them out to hang, and don't get rid of those one-on-ones. Make sure you have time for them to talk about and deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with. Continue to encourage them to do that. But in this case, we had multiple things that we needed to work through. And the first one that we needed to address was the expectation gap. This was an area where her boss had moved on and taken another role in the organization. So they filled the role with someone else that came in from the outside. And my client had lots of expectations about, what this role is and how someone should lead. And some of it was just her own thoughts about it and about leadership. Some of it is residuals from how her old boss was and what that relationship was. And this new person just does not meet that at all. Just totally different. And it has really threw her off, because just not even spending the time to have some of the necessary conversations about, hey, what are your expectations? What is the strategy? Are you changing the strategy moving forward? What do I need to pay attention to? What do I need to communicate to my team? And these are very important conversations to have, but she just wasn't having them. So what do we do when there is that level of frustration and you're literally not getting what you need? I had a boss once who, brilliant. I loved working with him. I loved working for him. But the rate at which he worked, it was lightning fast. It was frustrating for people because he would just buzz through things and ideas before you could even get caught up on what we were doing. He had already moved on to something else. And it wasn't for everyone. And I needed to adjust how I dealt with him and what I expected to get from him and what I knew that I was not going to get from him. And what I did instead was I worked around, not in a sneaky kind of behind his back kind of way. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about sneaking around. I'm just saying opening up and broadening the possibilities of you being able to figure out some other ways to get things done. Sometimes that was through my peer group. Sometimes that was through his peer network, because my team had to work with their team. So that meant I needed to align with the VP over there, which meant that I'm going to have a conversation with that VP over there. Did my boss need to make that connection? No. But sometimes we act like we can't do that. We can't make that leap unless someone opens the door or says that that's what we should go do. And one of the main things that you can do to help to alleviate and minimize some of the barriers that get in the way of you doing your work is to continue to build out your network. Don't forget about your network. We get into these silos and we don't spend the time continuing some of the connections that we've made or making new ones. And that sometimes is the difference between people who can actively get things done and the ones that are sitting around waiting for people to get back to them. Some organizations, your network is your currency. How you get around and how you navigate is through your network. So use the opportunity, particularly with those who you already have an established relationship with. So one of the things we worked on was, well, I know your boss went on to another role in the company, but have you continued to reach out and connect with her every week? I'm not talking about a one-on-one, but continuing the connection, checking in every once in a while. How are things going? What are you doing? What are some things that you can help me with? What are some things that I can help you with? Who are some other people that I can be building some relationships with? This is what I have got going on. How might this fit into what your team is doing? Making those connection points. When your peers move to other places within the organization, keep the connection. Keep those doors open. We tend to get very siloed. And then when there is a barrier, we get stuck and we don't have anywhere to go because we're like, oh, there's only this one exit and now there's a traffic jam and I can't get around it. So figure out where some other off ramps you can create for yourself to get around and get some things done. So part of that is understanding and identifying where your expectation doesn't meet reality. You may have some expectations about how someone should be showing up, and it just is not the reality. And there's a little micro story that brought this ahead for her. Is they were doing an offsite at somewhere, it doesn't matter where. There was an offsite. It was a leadership offsite, and she was so excited to be able to finally get to spend some time with the new boss and to talk about strategy and to talk about, hey, let's talk about expectation. Let's talk about these things so that I'm clear, you're clear, and I can move forward. And none of it happened. Basically, she saw her at the beginning of the week and then didn't see her the rest of the time, which is very, very frustrating. Now, I'm not defending this boss. I think there are some things that clearly are not going well, but that doesn't have to be a bottleneck or have to be a barrier for you to get your work done and to get things moving forward. Because what happens, and the next thing that we were able to identify and think through was the mental energy it was taking on her to be in this mode of disappointment and frustration and wondering when the adjustment was going to happen, wondering when things were going to change. Well, they may not ever change. And whatever the outcome of that situation is going to be, let that be. So as you think about how much time you spend being frustrated or being annoyed and wondering why and if you're spending a lot of time doing that, you have to make an adjustment because it's not necessarily your responsibility to get them on track or to change them. They've got to figure out what those gaps are for themselves. Another thing that actually happens is where I've had people want to protect the emotions of others in the office, including the boss. Well, I don't want them to get upset. I don't want them to be frustrated. If I go talk to that person over there, maybe they will not like it. Well, the first question is why? Why not? Particularly if you can get things done without having to go through them or bug them to get it done, why would that upset them? But more importantly, why are you taking that on as your responsibility to make sure that they're not upset? There's almost like this emotional, unspoken emotion rule that, well, if this person's upset or if this person's frustrated, I'm not allowed to be frustrated. So then you do all the work to balance it out as if two people frustrated in the same room is somehow there's something wrong with that. There is a difference between being regulated and shutting yourself down. And a lot of you, especially the high achievers, what tends to happen is you take on other people's responsibility, emotional responsibility, and then wonder why you're so exhausted at the end of the day. Well, if they're upset, then I need to come in and stabilize. If someone isn't liking something that's going on over here, I need to come in and I need to put the fire out. In an actual emergency, that's true. We need someone to stabilize, whether it's literally or metaphorically. We need someone to regulate the room, like be the calm one. But the problem is when you apply that to everything, everywhere, everyone's emotions, that's when it becomes too heavy. And it's not your burden to carry. And where that breaks down is that you're not responding to a crisis. You're just responding to disappointment and frustration and being out of alignment. And this rule, you won't allow yourself to feel or experience those things. So you don't actually allow yourself to process through them. So a few things happen, and there's a cost to that. There's a specific cost to when you're not processing your own emotions and you're taking on the responsibility of balancing out everyone else's. Is one, you override your own experience. You're disappointed, but instead of processing it, you shift into, okay, let me stabilize the situation. Now you're managing the room instead of being in the room. You take on the emotional responsibility that isn't yours. If she's upset, now I feel like I have to balance it out. When you shut it all down, you're missing out on the valuable information that your emotions or the data, what it's telling you. It might be telling you, hey, this is something important, or this is something that's out of alignment. That unprocessed emotion, it does not go away. What happens is they come out at the wrong time with the wrong people. So you being frustrated is fine. You can be grounded and frustrated. You can be thoughtful and disappointment. You can hold your leadership presence without abandoning your own reaction. That's where you need to balance. Balance yourself, not leveling it for everyone else, particularly when it's your boss. That can be a heavy burden as well. So if your boss's emotions are unmanaged and getting in the way, it's not your job to pick them up and balance everything out. It's not. You get to let them do what they do. Now, that also means that you are also not the person, the go-to person for everyone else to vent about the boss. Because that was also happening with the client. They're like, well, now everyone calls me and they're like, oh, we got to talk about what's happening here. And you've got to shut that down. You don't have to be the go-to person for that. Just because you know how to regulate and can be the stabilizer, you don't have to hold that role. I should probably do a whole episode on just that alone. But in the meantime, the one thing that you can do when you get that chat or that text and you're like, hey, do you have a moment? You have an inkling that someone's like, oh, I just had to talk with the boss and I need to now talk it out. There's a couple things that you can do. And the first thing that I recommend is you ask people, what is it that you need? What do you need from me? Do you just need a listening ear? Do you want to brainstorm some ideas about how to work this through? Do you want to talk through how you're going to give the boss some feedback? And the other thing that I want you to do is I want you to put a time limit on it. Don't get sucked in. Hey, do you have a few minutes? Yeah, I have 10. I have 10 minutes. Talk about it. And then we've got to move on to something else. So don't get sucked in. An hour later, you're sitting there like, okay, and they're rehashing things over and over and over again. I know that happens. And now you're behind because you wanted to be a support for someone else. And I'm not saying don't be a support. But if you yourself don't give the time to process what it is that you're going through, you certainly can't be the one to do that for everyone else. So work through, allow yourself to process some of those frustrations and those disappointment, and also be a support to others, but you don't have to take on the responsibility of what their emotions and their feelings are. Now, as you are working and trying to get things done, at some point, it can start feeling personal. It can start messing with how you see yourself, your identity. So you're doing all the things you know how to do. You're trying to get things moving forward. And you might start to ask, wait, hold on, am I the problem? Is this an issue for me? What does it say about me and my leadership? Or eventually you might get to the point of, well, what am I even doing here? If you're just going to be in the way. And I've seen those articles and there are lots of headlines that say people don't leave jobs, they leave managers or they leave bosses. I think sometimes there's a little bit of truth to that. I don't know that it's always the truth, but I think there might be some more things that you can explore before taking that route. So one thing I already talked about, continue to build out your network and create additional pathways for you to get the work done. When you do that, you will continue to build out your own influence, right? Because when you get to the point where you're like, why am I even here? It's no longer about the situation or the boss. It really is about you. So this is where you can shift your thinking to put you back on track. And the thought is, even though I have these constraints, even though this person seemingly is blocking me from doing what I need to do, what is still available to me? Who else is available to me? This allows you to open up the possibilities and think about what else you might be able to do. So things like building your influence outside of a formal structure. How do I do that? I make sure that I'm meeting people. I'm making sure that I'm being curious about them. I'm making sure I understand how other parts of the business works and where my role and my team fits into that other part of the business. When you can connect those dots, that is very important. Maintaining those relationships that you've already built. I've talked about that in building your network. But then also, and I think this is very important, is to spend some time rethinking what requires your boss and what doesn't. There's probably some things that you are assuming your boss has to do or approve where you actually can move forward with those things anyway. So think about, where are you waiting on someone else to move when you can actually make a move without them? What part of your role really actually requires them? And what part have you assumed requires them? Open up the possibility and explore different options. And then finally, where can you expand your influence anyway? The person who knows a lot of people tends to be able to get a lot of things done, or at least make connections. I'm always impressed by people who network well because they don't feel like they have to do everything. They can just make a connection. They go, oh, I know so-and-so who can maybe answer that question for you. Or I know so-and-so over here who can maybe get something moving for you or who can handle that. I'm always fascinated by it. It's not necessarily something that is a huge, strong point for me. It's something that I'm working on as well. But I love it when I can make some of those connections and connect the dots for people. So moving your time and energy away from the things getting in your way and focusing instead on recalibrating your steps is time better spent for you. And it actually gives you a lot more control. But you take the control away from, oh, this boss is being a barrier and preventing me from getting things done, and focusing on what are the things that are actually in my control that I can continue to move forward with and make some moves on. Okay? So broaden out that view and challenge some of the assumptions, get out of those silos so that you can move around a little bit more freely. So take some time, think about where you're making those assumptions, and come back so I can see you next time. Hey, if something in this episode resonated, I want you to know you don't have to navigate it alone. This is the work we do inside the Leadership Lab, building capacity, strengthening decision-making, and learning how to lead with intention through change. If you're curious about working together, you'll find more information in the show notes. I'm glad you were here. I'll see you next time.